Welcome to Delivering Miracles, a podcast to teach women like you tips and strategies on how you can have a safer pregnancy so you can bring home a healthy baby. I'm your host and your high-risk pregnancy expert, Parijat Deshpande. I can't wait to chat with you. You know what's so interesting about the work that I do is I work with such a wide variety of people. You know, we talk about infertility, high-risk pregnancy, preterm delivery, and those are very large umbrella terms for experiences that people go through. But when you look at the details of it, every experience is so different. You can have the same diagnosis. You can deliver the baby at the same gestational age. You can have the same complications. And the way it presents, the way it affects your life, the way it affects your health can be completely different. And yet, sometimes there are times, I don't know if it's times of the year or if it's what it is, but I get waves of people who have very similar kind of starting points or very similar umbrellas that they fall under. And this year, interestingly, the umbrella that many of my clients were under was having the history of having a baby in the NICU and trying to conceive again. I had a really high percentage of clients so far this year who fell under that umbrella, baby having been in the NICU and now they're trying to conceive again. And they knew that nervous system regulation needed to be a part of their prenatal and fertility care plan. So that's why they reached out to me. It was so fascinating. Not all of them were in the NICU because they were born preterm. Many of them were. I have had a sprinkling of people who had full-term babies in the NICU for several days to several weeks. But it's so fascinating how that happens. I'm always sitting back going, I wonder what brought all those people with that in common over to me at the same time. It's so fascinating to me. I love working with people who have a NICU experience though, because it's a very, very specific type of trauma that is very unusual. I think what we have and what I like to remind people is that when you have a baby in the NICU, your fears, once the baby is home, about that baby or future pregnancies or future babies is not a fear based on things you've read or heard about. It's a fear based on something you've experienced and have memories of, right? And that's a very different kind of presentation and a very different kind of experience as you enter parenthood, whether it was your first child or your fifth child or anything in between. And it changes you. It changes your expectations of yourself and your experience in your role as a parent, your role as a provider, and it just completely shifts what you understand to be normal. I remember for myself, my son, who was in the NICU, right? He was the first baby to be born, right? We had lost one before him. So in a way, he was my first child that I had a chance to take care of. And before that, the only experience I had was relatives, babies, there, or babies that I worked with when I was working in the infant development lab for research. And my inclination, my very strong visceral reaction was to reach into his isolette and to stroke him. It was just a very strong visceral body reaction. That's just what I wanted to do. That's what you do, right? When a baby is uncomfortable or you want to soothe a child, you hold and you touch and you stroke. And my very first lesson as a parent to this particular child was you can't do that because he was born so sick. He was born so early that any type of handling, so to speak, of him besides the typical cares of changing his diaper and taking his temperature and all that was very hard on his body. And second, he was born so early that touching him was painful. He hadn't developed a full layer of skin yet. And so in the NICU, whether your baby was born preterm or later term, close to term, full term, whatever that might be, it changes the way you enter parenthood and challenges, even if it's your first child, everything you know about what it means to be a parent. Right? And that's not to say you can't relearn it or you can't adapt, but it's a very interesting entrance to parenthood. And what it does is not only changes your experience of parenting, but it actually can change the way that you experience yourself. Self-identity shifts tremendously when you have a baby in the NICU. And I want to share the story of one of the many clients I had this year who was open for me to share part of her story about self-identity and having a baby in the NICU. So I'm going to call this client Claire. She had a son who was born at term who needed to spend several weeks in the NICU. He wasn't super sick, but there were just enough health complications that he wasn't really stable enough to go home. And so they spent several weeks in the NICU. Now, first of all, she had an uncomplicated pregnancy, so this was not expected. Second of all, she delivered at term, so that was especially not expected. You don't talk about, you really don't hear about the full-term babies that end up in the NICU for days and weeks. When you think of NICU, you think of preemie. I know I do. I did for a long time. I still do. It just comes out that I equate prematurity with the NICU, but full-term babies are there in the NICU too. I think there's a pretty huge statistic that close to 50%, I believe, of NICU babies, depending on the NICU you're looking in, are full-term. Now, of course, most of the full-term babies that are in the NICU don't stay for very long. Some of them do, like Claire's son. He stayed for a long time. He was there for a few weeks. And she described the experience as having turned into a basket case. Now, I typically work with women who are professionals, who are career-driven, motivated, very high achievers in all parts of their life. And so to feel like she was unraveling was a very new experience for her. She was somebody who thrives, and as most of my clients do, because I think it's because they might be attracted to the fact that I do, like control. They like to be in control. They like to know. And the first thing you learn in the NICU is we don't know. You have to get really comfortable with not knowing. It's extremely hard. If you haven't been in the NICU, I don't know how to fully express just how difficult that is, especially when you see this life in front of you and nobody can tell you what's happening or what could happen in the next 5 minutes, 5 hours, the next day. You live each moment hanging on, almost like you're walking in a mine, blindfolded. And you just go, I guess we have to keep walking because there's no other option. The time is passing, so we are moving forward. I have no idea when or if I will step on a mine, right? We're going to come back to that in a second of what that means for us. But she described herself as feeling like a basket case. She didn't know what to expect. She didn't know who to talk to. Her anxiety, she said, I've never been an anxious person. Never had anxiety as a problem. And now I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. I couldn't eat. I was crying all the time. I couldn't understand what was happening. And nobody had answers for me that would satisfy me. So she spent all her time Googling and researching and trying to get all this information, right? How many of us can understand that, right? We've all done it. And still, it was not enough. And she kept telling herself, just like so many of us NICU parents do, once he comes home, it's all going to get better. Once he comes home, it's all going to get better. I believed that. And in a lot of ways, it did, right? It's nice to not be in the hospital. It's nice to be the primary caretaker of the child that you just want to be at home with. It's nice to be under the same roof and you don't have to go travel to see your child. That's supposed to happen when they're 18, not when they're 18 minutes old, right? And so that's what she told herself. But it was extremely difficult for her to cope with being in the NICU, as it is for many parents. And she reached out a couple of years later. So this had happened a couple of years ago and then this year is when I worked with her. So it was 2 years later. She realized that I still feel like a basket case. And her partner had said something to her about, I just want the old Claire back. And it hit her like a ton of bricks because now, thankfully, her son is doing fantastic. He's got no lingering health issues. Everything just kind of fell into place and he healed and he's doing great. And her partner had the expectation that, okay, well, it didn't all get better as soon as he came home from the NICU, but it's 2 years out now. This little baby is now a 2-year-old and Claire is still not Claire. And that was the expectation. He said, I want the old Claire back. And she recounted to me how it didn't feel like a gut punch. She said it in terms of a really bad, like, oh, that sucked to hear. But it was a wake-up call for her because she hadn't realized how far off track she had gone from who she really is. That the anxiety had become her new normal. She completely forgot what it was like to not be anxious all the time. And now the target of that anxiety, which is her son's health, was no longer applicable. It wasn't a present trigger for that anxiety because there was nothing happening to him. He was fine. He had been cleared by all kinds of specialists, and his health continued to improve for 2 years. And yet she was still stuck there to the point where she couldn't step back and see how far off she had gone from who she was before. Now, sometimes I speak with clients who go, well, that I'm never going to go back to that person. I'm too different now. And I'd like to challenge that for a second. I know how it feels. I've been there. And I will acknowledge that you as a person, your values have likely changed, right? The way that you understand, say, fertility or pregnancy or prematurity or babies or health, infant development, those things have changed, right? How much you have learned has changed. The languages that you know have changed. But you as you, at your core, has not changed. That core, though, has become so protected with everything else that needed to be there to keep you safe and alive through this really, really difficult, challenging, heartbreaking journey, that we lose access to it. We lose access to it. And that's why we feel like we're never going to get back there again. Because you imagine, I get this visual of, if you're a Friends fan, that episode where Joey is wearing all of Chandler's clothes. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's plenty of GIFs out there for you to go check it out. But, that's what's happened, is there's many, 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 many protective layers, but who you are at the very center of that is the same. And we lose sight of that. Now, why does that happen, right? No, number one, it's for survival. You don't need to access the parts of you that make you, not all of them anyway, in order to get through the NICU. The NICU is a place for survival. You are in survival mode along with your child while they're in the NICU, and sometimes even afterwards, especially if there are health complications that continue. And so you don't need it, right? And when we're in survival mode, physiologically, our bodies turn off access to all parts of our bodies that are not essential for survival. That includes reproduction, right? Which is why we talk about trauma release being so important when you are trying to conceive, especially if you are struggling. Even if you're struggling with fertility treatment, this could be a big piece of the puzzle that's missing. You don't need to conceive if you are in survival mode, your body's saying, right? We can't support this, right? Same thing in pregnancy, same thing in the NICU. If you don't need it to survive, your brain will shut it off. We don't need it. So we're going to spend all our energy and all our time and all of the, all of the blood flow and all the energy is going to go to the aspects of our body that are essential for survival. And it's actually really cool. You can see it if you want to nerd out for a second. You can see those shifts happening on functional MRI images, where when you see somebody in survival mode, there are actual parts of your brain that no longer receive the same amount of blood flow. One of them is included in that is being able to retain information. If you find yourself in that survival mode and you're in a doctor's appointment or you're sitting in the NICU and the neonatologist comes by and is telling you information about your baby and you're listening and you're listening and you're listening and later you go, wait, what did they say? And it's like, it's just gone, right? That's why. It's not essential to retain information for you to survive, and therefore your brain doesn't prioritize it. It's not because you're not sleeping enough. It's not because there's something wrong with you. You suddenly lost your intellect, your IQ points of drop, whatever you're telling yourself. It's none of that. It's survival mode. And if you follow physiology, you don't need it. It makes perfect sense. The second piece of that is just building on top of it, of why we lose ourselves, is trauma, which is that sense of survival, and being in survival mode, you get stuck there, right? Being in survival mode is not a problem. It's when you get stuck there, when the threat to life is gone, that's trauma. And so essentially all the shifts that happen in your brain and in your body that keep you in survival mode, everything stays in that, at that level, right? So access to information still remains hard. Remembering names and dates and being able to recall information still remains hard. Language itself, you might find yourself fumbling for words a lot. That remains hard, Doesn't mean it's impossible to do. It just takes so much energy to override the system that's been shut down to keep you alive. And the third reason we lose ourselves, these are three big ones. There's a lot of reasons, but the three big ones I wanted to cover today. The third reason is there's a lack of tolerance with discomfort. And what I mean by that sounds judgy. I don't mean it like that. What I mean is when we have discomfort, when we had that discomfort in the NICU, right? It was a very uncomfortable place to be. For Claire, for example, she was really, really anxious, right? Anxiety itself is not the issue. It is that the anxiety was paired with fear and survival and a fear for losing life, right? And when that happens, we tolerate, in this case, anxiety much, much less. That as soon as we start noticing the signs of anxiety, alarms go ringing much sooner because we've paired it with the expectation of life being threatened. And when that happens, again, you lose access to you because now the priority is, oh shoot, I need to find a way to survive, right? So there's like three main things that we talked about. There's that myopia of like, you are in survival mode in the NICU. And so you don't need access to parts of you that make you you, the things that are quirky about you that everybody loves, right? You're in survival mode, so you don't need that aspect of you, right? For some people, that might be humor. For some, humor stays because that's your survival mechanism, and that's fine. How it shows up for everybody is different, but you've got, maybe for you, humor disappears. Maybe for you, being able to retain information disappears. Maybe for you, your social self disappears and you just don't want to be around anyone anymore, right? Whatever it is you love to paint and suddenly painting doesn't seem interesting to you anymore. You're a singer and you can't seem to get your voice in the place it needs to be to sing songs, right? Whatever those pieces of you that make you you. And those are things that you likely had since you were a child, right? That made you so special. You don't have access to that because you're in survival mode. The second reason is you stay in survival mode. Even after the threat to life is gone, that's trauma. And the third is that even if you were to start accessing pieces of you, the minute you start feeling discomfort. So for Claire, that discomfort was anxiety. Maybe for you, it's fear. Maybe for somebody else, it's being tired. Whatever it was that you were feeling that was uncomfortable at the time in the NICU when life was threatened, we now pair that with fear and lack of safety. And so suddenly that discomfort overrides everything we're trying to do. So maybe you're going back to piano classes, or you're maybe back to singing at home, or you're back to painting, and then something happens to trigger your anxiety, and those alarms start ringing way sooner because now anxiety feels not just uncomfortable, it's now unsafe, right? And so if you can see, the commonality here is that we don't feel safe. And when we don't feel safe, who we are doesn't matter. The little quirks about us, the fact that you like to put chocolate chips on the side of your ice cream instead of on top, or, the fact that you like to cook listening to podcasts instead of music, or the fact that you like to wake up at 5:30 in the morning and go for a run before everybody is awake, the fact that you like your tea extremely scaldingly hot, right? Those little things about us disappear. And then you have experiences like Claire did, where your partner goes, I want the old Claire back. And you go, how do you do that? As long as we don't feel safe, we feel disconnected to our core sense of self. And it will stay that way. It will stay that way. As long as we don't feel safe, we will feel disconnected to our sense of self. It boils down to just that. So when Claire reached out to me, that was kind of her thing. Like, how do I get back to feeling like me again? And I told her, there's two things we've got to do. Two things. One, and this is the piece that blows my client's mind. So I'm very excited to hear how this goes for you. One is you have to accept that this has all happened. And I don't mean that in an affirmations kind of way where I just repeat it to myself and go, I survived, or whatever that might be. I want you to ask yourself this particular question. How does everything I'm feeling right now make complete, perfect sense, given what I've been through? Oh, bam. It blows my clients' minds because we get so used to looking at the cross section of our lives. Claire was 2 years out from the NICU. And in that world where her son was 2 years old and she had chosen not to go back to work, so she was staying at home with him, and her husband was back to work, and they were meeting up with family for holidays, and they were participating in school events, preschool events. They were hosting friends for barbecues. In that world, her anxiety made no sense. It looked pathological. And that is the problem that I have with our current mental health system. When you look at a cross-section, the symptoms look pathological. But if you zoom out and you go, when did this begin? Why did it happen? Right? Where did this anxiety come from? How did it serve me then? And how does it continue to make sense now? All of a sudden, those symptoms are no longer pathological. They have a purpose. They make sense. And now you're not trying to fix something that's broken. You are trying to undo the stuckness, the physiological stuckness of trauma to allow your body to heal. It is massively powerful when you're able to do that. Massively powerful. I teach this to my private clients. I have taught this to my Healing Hearts members. It blows their minds because nobody in your world right now is looking at your symptoms in that way. Your body, your experiences. Nobody's looking at it. We go, this doesn't feel good. This is annoying. I'm so tired all the time. I feel so depressed. I'm missing out on everything. This is a problem. Yeah, it is a problem. And that's why we're not going to stick with it. We're not going to say, okay, well, it makes sense. So now we're not going to do anything about it. That's not it at all. It is, let's first understand the role that this plays. Where does it even come from? And why is it still here? And when we can do that, the judgment melts away. I am now no longer wondering what is wrong with me. My partner is no longer wondering, why are you still holding on to this stuff? Because you're not holding on to it. It makes sense because of number 2. You don't feel safe. So the second step to this, as I told Claire, and as I tell all my clients, we have to help you feel safe in your body again. You have to feel safe. You don't feel safe right now. You're still waiting for the other shoe to drop. You are still waiting for the bad news. You are still waiting for something to explode. And living in that level of survival mode takes a toll on your entire body. And in this episode, we're focusing specifically on your loss of identity. You cannot go back to feeling like you again as long as you feel threatened. It's not possible. Physiologically not possible. Some amazing tools are available to you to help you feel safe again. Trauma-informed yoga is hugely popular and hugely effective. Trauma-informed breath work, EMDR, somatic experiencing. These are all some great tools that you want to work with, but you want to make sure you're working with somebody who understands the nuances of having a baby in the NICU, right? So suddenly the pool to choose from gets a lot smaller. Not a lot of people know what that's like. What I specifically teach is nervous system regulation. And I do that with my private clients for women who are trying to conceive. We do this through the Path to Baby program. And I teach it in my Healing Hearts program for women who are done growing their family and are done with that aspect of it, but don't feel done, if you know what I mean, because they're still there in survival mode. Those links are in the bottom of the show notes if you want to learn more about that. Those are really the 2 steps here. You got to understand how what you're experiencing makes sense in the larger picture, to depathologize the symptoms and to understand how they make perfect sense. Build that compassion, melt away that judgment, so you can understand you're not trying to fix something that's broken. You are trying to allow your body's natural healing system to take over to help you heal from that trauma, right? There's a stuckness there. It's just described to a client about how it feels. Imagine it like a pipe that's full with like paper towels or something, and the water can't flow. Your job is just to take that, like the paper towels that are stuck in the pipe and get rid of them, and the water will flow the way that it needs to flow. It knows how to do that. That's our job. It's just to remove the stuckness in our nervous system, and the rest of the body will know what to do afterward. That's the amazing thing about the human body, right? So you take away that judgment, you're able to do that work. And the way you do that work is you've got to learn how to feel safe in your body again. And you notice now, I didn't include anything about your thoughts. Rebuilding your safety has nothing to do with your thoughts. I will say this till I'm blue in the face. You cannot think yourself into safety because you didn't think yourself into survival mode. It happened because you were scared, because your baby's life was threatened. And so you have to do the body work to get to that baseline first. Because as long as you don't feel safe, you will feel disconnected from who you are at your core. That's what it boils down to. And that's the work that I did with Claire. We worked on that acceptance piece and removing that judgment, getting her to see the full picture of how it all makes sense. And then we worked on building safety in her body. I taught her nervous system regulation techniques that were so powerful that within a matter of a couple of weeks, the trauma she was holding on to from the NICU and the memories that she had with her son in there and the tests that he had to do and all of that completely disappeared. To the point where she had been avoiding the NICU for 2 years, she was able to walk right into that hospital, right up to those double doors. No panic, no fear, no anxiety, no avoidance. She was there, she was present, and she walked away with completely on her own by choice. It was such a powerful moment. I can still remember the email she sent me detailing that whole experience. This stuff is powerful. And in doing that, she started to find herself again. She remembered how much she loved being at their beach house. They hadn't been in 2 years. She remembered colors and textures of clothes that she would love to wear that she'd never worn in 2 years. She started telling jokes again. She was humming as she was cleaning the house, something her partner hadn't seen her do in 2 years. And it just happened because she shifted her physiology. That is a tongue twister. Because she shifted her physiology, she gave her body what it was missing for 2 years, safety. And it's totally possible. As long as you don't feel safe, you will feel disconnected from who you are. But the minute you start feeling those moments of safety again, and this is even if you've got a child who has medical complications, even if there's a lot of unknowns happening in your world, the safety can exist despite that. And when you can feel that safety, who you are at your core will start to come back out again. I promise. And it is such a beautiful feeling. You can feel the tightness that's been on you start to melt away and just open up, and you can go, oh, it's me again. And you reclaim your life that way. You get to enjoy your life again. Truly enjoy it. Not just say you're enjoying it, but really be present for it and start making choices in the direction of creating this beautiful life that you want to have, but you haven't felt has been possible, even if you wanted it. The NICU robs families of a lot. Moments and milestones, memories and experiences, and even a sense of identity, of who we are as people, as partners, as new parents. And it does shape the way that we experience the world and future pregnancies and babies. 100%. But who you are at your core is still there. It's just buried under a very protective layer. And the sooner you can establish safety, the sooner you can get back to feeling like you again. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I am so glad that we had a chance to chat about this. There's so much about trauma and safety and the NICU that we can talk about, but I'm glad we are ending NICU Awareness Month for this year on this topic. And I hope that you find a sense of hope in this. This is not your new normal. You can bring the elements of you back into your new world. You can do that. And I promise it's absolutely possible. And if you want to know more about how I can support you to do that, click the links at the bottom of the show notes. If you're trying to conceive again, the Path to Baby program is right for you. If you are done trying to conceive and you're done growing your family and you're looking just for trauma resolution work, the Healing Hearts program is right for you. Also, you can support Delivering Miracles by leaving a 5-star review on iTunes or telling a friend about the podcast. It would be great to share this message with so many women and couples who have struggled on their family building journey. And lastly, I would love to stay in touch. So head over to Instagram at healthy.highriskpregnancy and come by and say hi and let me know what you enjoyed about this episode. I can't wait to hear from you. The NICU changes a lot, and yet some things still remain unchanged. I hope with everything I have that you have glimmers, very soon of being you again in this new world that you've created and you find yourself in. I hope you can experience that relief and that joy that comes with being less shackled by the past and what you've been through. And I can't wait to hear how that feels for you. Take it one day, one step at a time. You can do this.